But it's why we're taking further action today as we work to prevent and respond to this terrible crime. And know the awareness is the first line of defense, and that a safe, inclusive school environment is essential for the well-being of our students. With the goal of building awareness and protecting our kids, I was also pleased as a government to support Bill 154, the Stop Cyberbullying in Ontario Act Day, that was proposed and passed by my colleague MPP Khalid Rashid. I'm confident that this Province Members Bill will raise greater awareness about cyber bullying and victimization to keep kids safe. Currently, the York Region District School Board is the only board in Ontario that has a multi-sector anti-sex trafficking policy. We're acting today to ensure that every school board, no later than January of 2022, has a strategy in place to protect students from this disgusting crime. We're announcing a multi-sector school-focused approach that keeps students safe, the first of its kind in Canada and within our school system, and it's about time we got this done to prevent even one more child from being victimized. It's going to equip our strategy will equip schools and school board staff with the tools to better identify and appropriately respond to suspected instances of sex trafficking and to better support for victims and survivors. To develop the new strategy to combat human trafficking, our government consulted with a wide variety of community partners and experts, informed by their lived experiences of those who have been trafficked, Indigenous communities and organizations, experts from policing and education, child welfare, frontline community-based organizations who support survivors to help guide our policies development. The strategy to combat human trafficking provides specific detailed direction to Ontario school boards that they develop protocols in place, expected to do so in collaboration with local partners that work to end sex trafficking. This is a major step forward. Our strategy to combat human trafficking establishes clear standards and a coherent province-wide approach. And with these new protocols, as noted, every school board will have a plan by January of 2022. We're also announcing $2.4 million in additional supports with the implementation to support training and other resources to better prevent, identify, and respond to sex trafficking of youth and children. This is crucial because we know that schools play a unique role to help combat sex trafficking and exploitation of students. Teachers and other schools and staff are well placed to educate about prevention, the promotion of healthy relationships, the notice of troubling changes in student behavior, and to connect with students as caring adults. Schools are well positioned to facilitate early intervention and to connect survivors to culturally responsive resources and supports. Education could help raise awareness among school staff, and school communities are here to help them recognize those signs that a student may be trafficked or involved in the trafficking of their peers. Schools also serve as a critical factor in helping survivors of trafficking heal and rebuild their lives, helping to prevent re-victimization and resetting students on a healing trajectory towards positive outcomes. Human trafficking is a particularly heinous crime that targets our most vulnerable members of our society. I'm proud of our government for developing a strategy to protect young people, most especially proud of the survivors and young people who worked with us to get us this far. Thank you for joining us today to help launch this important new strategy to keep kids safe, to protect families and our schools as we look to getting all children back to school in class this September. I'm now pleased to turn things over to the Solicitor General of Ontario, Sylvia Jones.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here today for this very important announcement. When our government developed and launched an anti-human trafficking strategy over a year ago, we made a commitment to raise awareness about human trafficking, protect victims, and provide support for survivors, and hold accountable the offenders. Today's announcement recognizes that schools play a unique and critical role in combating human trafficking by raising awareness among students, parents, and caregivers, as well as school staff. This new framework will provide school boards with the training to prevent, recognize, identify, and appropriately respond to sex trafficking of children and youth. and in doing so, will help support our efforts to protect these vulnerable members of our society while continuing to vigorously fight this heinous crime. The framework complements and builds on other initiatives we have recently put in place, such as the new Combating Human Trafficking Act 2021, passed by the legislature just a few weeks ago. This new act includes important protections for children and youth and enhances the tools we have at our disposal to intervene early and deter trafficking. We've also ramped up intelligence gathering efforts by police and correctional services related to the identification and interception of human trafficking networks and have enhanced investments to expand the capacity of the Ontario Provincial Police Sexual Child Exploitation Unit. These efforts are more important than ever as we continue to battle COVID-19 because we know that traffickers are taking advantage of the pandemic by deploying sophisticated communications tools and using social media platforms to target, groom, and recruit our victims when so many young people are at home online and isolated from supports and services. We also recognize the significant risk human trafficking poses to Indigenous communities, disproportionately targeting and exploiting Indigenous women and girls. This is why the province's anti-human trafficking strategy includes culturally appropriate, Indigenous-specific and Indigenous-led services and supports embedded throughout to ensure a holistic response. In alignment with these efforts, today our focus is on prevention and early intervention, and specifically promoting and supporting prevention and response to protect vulnerable children and youth from sex trafficking. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Ministry of Education's Anti-Human Trafficking Working Group, and particularly Cassandra Diamond. We could not have had a stronger, more inclusive, engaged lead for this working group, and I very much appreciate her efforts. The more expert perspectives that we can include in our work will undoubtedly help strengthen how we address these ongoing threats against our young people from a public policy perspective. We will continue to work collaboratively across the many sectors that have a role to play in preventing sex trafficking and in supporting victims and survivors so they can live free from the threat, fear, and experience of exploitation and rebuild their lives. That includes school boards supported by this new framework, who are key partners in helping build awareness, prevent, and address this horrific crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Jones, and thank you, Langstaff Secondary School, for being our host today. It is a pleasure to be here with you. As Minister Lecce has said, human trafficking is a very serious issue facing Ontario today. It is among the fastest growing crimes worldwide and poses a grave threat to children and youth across the province. I cannot overstate the devastating impact of sex trafficking on its victims, their families, and our communities. Sex trafficking robs those who are being exploited and abused of their safety, health, and livelihood, and it often results in long-term emotional, physical, and mental trauma. It upends families. It funds criminal activity and shatters lives. And we need to take action to fight this crime and keep our children and youth safe. The new policy framework for school boards we are announcing today is an incredible step forward in raising awareness and protecting children and youth. It draws on the tremendous resources that we have in our schools. They are uniquely positioned to educate students about the dangers of sex trafficking, help spot the warning signs, aid in prevention, support early intervention, and connect students to supportive services. It also reflects our focus on collaboration, working across sectors with community partners and across government to address these issues. And it supports our government strategy to combat human trafficking and end child sexual exploitation, which we've been putting into action over the past year. The strategy focuses on supporting survivors and holding offenders accountable. as well as raising awareness and early intervention. Both are areas where we have already taken important strides. We have updated the elementary health and physical education curriculum to include mandatory learning about online safety and consent to keep kids safe and respond to the growing threat of human trafficking. We have released an interactive digital educational tool called include mandatory learning about online safety and consent to keep kids safe and respond to the growing threat of human trafficking. We have released an interactive digital educational tool called those who face it on the front lines every day in service agencies and law enforcement. We also appreciate the advice of those representatives from the education sector, school boards, universities and students, the child welfare sector, and from Indigenous communities and organizations. Together, we have achieved an important milestone in the fight against human trafficking in Ontario. The work you have done will change the lives of children and youth across Ontario for the better. With this new policy framework, our schools will become key partners in helping to build awareness and prevent this crime. The onus is on all of us to protect our children and youth, and we know we have another tool in our toolbox to keep them safe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much and good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this very important announcement. As we know, prevention is the most important tool in fighting human trafficking. And I can't be more proud of our government, who has continued to work hard to create partnerships with different sectors that aid in prevention, like schools, to fight human trafficking. We know that for over a decade, I've been fortunate to work with Cassandra Diamond and her great work. And now with schools playing an important role in teaching prevention and identifying victims and youth at risk. Schools are also a significant source of support for youth. By providing helpful and trauma-informed resources and supports to survivors, educators have the opportunity to help them have a more positive outcome. The plan announced today is another important step in ending human trafficking. And I know that Minister Lecce mentioned the story of a 15-year-old girl. I just want to mention that the average age of recruitment is 13 years old. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of awareness and all coming together, not only through all my colleagues, but the ministries in coordinating and working hard to end human trafficking. Cassandra with us today with the frontline organizations like Bridge North has that expertise and dedication, and that's why more Ontarians have become aware of the prevalence of this horrible crime in our communities and why we are taking action to fight against it. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And I'd now like to pass it over to my colleague, Sam Oosterhoff, Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Lori. I appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of our ministry's working group on anti-human trafficking for the countless hours that they spent laying the groundwork for the policy that is being announced here today, and for their invaluable work being done to support children and youth. Aujourd'hui, comme l'indique le ministre Stephen Lecce, nous sommes ici pour annoncer un nouveau cadre stratégique destiné aux conseils scolaires afin de les aider à protéger les élèves de l'horrible crime qu'est le trafic sexuel. Ce nouveau cadre stratégique reconnaît le rôle essentiel que les écoles peuvent jouer dans la lutte contre la traite sexuelle. L'investissement de 2,4 millions de dollars annoncé aujourd'hui contribuera à veiller à ce que les conseils scolaires et le personnel des écoles aient les outils nécessaires pour détecter la traite sexuelle des enfants et des jeunes, y réagir et le prévenir. Addressing this tragic evil practice with compassion and conviction means all government ministries have to work together to better support survivors and to help those being trafficked. This strategy today will help raise awareness and understanding of sex trafficking, including the urgency and complexity of combating sex trafficking. It will also support procedures for students who are at risk or who may be groomed or recruited by other students, as well as training school board employees, educators, administrators, and other school staff, as well as establishing approaches to support accountability and evaluation. Nous sommes convaincus que le nouveau protocole ainsi que les financements alloués encourageront et favorisent un travail plus soutenu sur cette question très importante et contribueront à mettre fin au flux de la traite sexuelle tout au soutenu les survivants. Merci beaucoup. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium to introduce and thank Cassandra Diamond, the founder and executive director of Bridge North Women's Mentorship and Advocacy Services. Cassandra, you're someone who's been a leader on this. Thank you for all that you've done. I will never forget the first meeting we had where we were able to talk about this, as well as with other levels of government. And it's just been so good to work with you, and appreciate all that you and all your colleagues do. I know it's been a difficult road, but it's amazing to see you here today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Herr Oosterhoff, ministers and officials. There are too many people to thank, and I want to spend my few moments sharing with you what I think are the highlights of this protocol. Survivors, students, parents, and teachers. My name is Cassandra Diamond. I'm the founder and executive director of Bridge North, a survivor-led organization serving trafficked persons in York Region. Our partner, York Region District School Board, headed by Dawn LaLiberte and Nancy Gymnopoulos, are very proud to have successfully implemented this protocol that you have heard about today in our region, here for Langstaff Secondary School. While you've just heard some stats mentioned, community groups will tell you there are way more victims than you think there are. This day is monumental for many reasons, but this reason, let me say, for Ontario's students, parents, and survivors of human trafficking, in the sense that we are turning the tide from enforcement to prevention. The Minister of Education's involvement is the reason, in part, and the great support of all of the other ministries is why we're turning that tide, as well as the support and the strong leadership of the survivors who have gone before me and those who work with me today. Six women, survivors of lived experience, worked on this protocol. The protocol now includes community partners, as well as law enforcement, as resources and responders for any student who is at risk of or being trafficked. However, The real value of this protocol is that it serves the real problem. Many, many victims are not identified before they become entrenched victims of human trafficking because educators have not been trained on how to identify or spot early warning signs of trafficking in children and youth. This protocol mandates training for all teachers K-12. Once trained, this means Ontario's students and parents now have 200,000 early interveners, educators that are safeguarding their children. At 17, by today's law, I was being trafficked while a student at York Region. I went to our schools, I shopped in our malls, and I ate in our restaurants, but nobody could see what was happening. I couldn't reach out. Someone would have to reach in. Well, Minister Lecce, I do believe that if teachers had been trained to identify the signs of human trafficking and exploitation, that I do believe a teacher would have and could have spotted the signs that would have helped me. Minister Lecce, your strong commitment to the protection and safeguarding of students, and as well as the hope that is now in my heart that did not exist before this mandate. And that hope is that we actually may be able to end sex trafficking. We always needed the education sector in play in order to do that. I now hope that we can end sex trafficking for the next future generations. Thank you, Minister Lecce.
Okay. Hi, Minister. I come bearing questions on behalf of the Queen's Park Press Gallery. The first question is from Holly Mackenzie Suter with the Canadian Press. She's wondering if there are any Ontario-based statistics on sex trafficking among school-aged children.
We do know that Ontario represents 2/3 of the trafficked persons in the country, disproportionately off the 400 series highways. And we know that the majority of sex trafficking will happen to children within schools, or school-age children, to be clear. My colleague Laurie Scott noted that it can start on average as young as 13, affecting young girls as well as boys. And part of the strategy, in part, is the K-12 mission of training that was described by Cassandra, is to ensure that there are, as I think she so perfectly put it, 200,000 members within communities right across Ontario, urban and rural, English and French, Catholic and public, in every community in this province where we have individuals that have that training. And I think it's going to make a big difference to help deter those statistics, that these are human beings, these are children with dignity. They should be seen for their intrinsic value. And I think it's troubling that we've seen such a high rate of trafficking increasing, in part because of the online victimization that's taking place. It's so much easier now to reach a child. And I'm happy that one of the first acts I made as minister in 2019 was announce a new health and physical education curriculum that from grade 1 until grade 6 introduces concepts like healthy relationships, consent, age appropriate. We talk about the importance of learning about your body and the respect that you deserve for yourself and others. And in grade 7 and 8, explicit learning on human trafficking at a more age appropriate time. So we obviously hope to, as Cassandra said, protect as many children as possible with the aim of ending trafficking and protecting kids.
You say the average age is 13, but do we know on average how many students from the Ontario school system are trafficked?
We can provide those details. I'm not sure we have them specifically within the school system. We have them grouped by age, of which the vast majority would be within our publicly funded schools, but we'll happily circle back with you on additional details.
The next question is from Alan Hale with Queen's Park Today. He asks, you've claimed many times that the average age of trafficking victims is 13. This would imply that there are just as many victims below that age as there are above. And he says that this has been debunked by outlets including the Washington Post. So how important was that claim to designing this strategy?
I'm going to turn it over to the co-chair of this strategy, Cassandra Diamond, maybe to provide context of the differentiated approaches between elementary and high school. What I could simply say is by mandating under the Education Act, the authority I have is to require every school board in Ontario to launch a comprehensive sector-wide multi-sector strategy that involves law enforcement, survivors, educators, parents, and students themselves part of the solution. Having a plan in every school board, I believe, will help reduce this heinous crime and protect children. And that's the basis for why we're here. It's also why we've announced $2.4 million in part to provide training, professional development training, specifically combating sex trafficking, so they know the signs. But I'll turn it over to Cassandra if she has anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Surely one student is one too many. However, that's not the question. That's the heart and the intent of Minister of Education's office. There are no actual staff consistent numbers that questioners can rely on in the near future with this protocol.
Great. Thank you. Another question for the Education Minister. This one comes from Snay Dougal with Queen's Park Briefing. During a recent community update, your colleague Gila Marto raised the question about the difference between virtual learning and pre-recorded videos from teachers. And she had asked, why should we pay a teacher maybe to even do this virtual learning? Should we just be recording the teachers and the students can just log on? Does this government stand by Marto's comments, and do you believe that this is an idea worth exploring?
The focus of this government and what I've been focused on for the past weeks is getting children back into class full-time this September, full stop. That is our priority. Not the comments or concepts proposed. What is our priority is ensuring children can safely get into school where we believe they belong for their mental health and their development, and making sure it's not just safe, but it is a positive learning experience for them where we restore the full complement of education that goes beyond just learning in the classroom. It's those extracurriculars, it's those volunteering, leadership development experiences, it's the sports that provide physical activity that's helpful for children. So, I think we've been very clear. Our intention and our focus is getting kids in class this September.
And a follow-up from Snay, what do you say to teachers then who have been working hard with virtual learning and might have been offended by the comments made by Ms. Marto? What do you say to those teachers?
I think I just express gratitude to every educator in Ontario for stepping up this past year and doing their very best in an incredibly difficult time. These are folks that enter this profession because they love children, and we're just very grateful for their commitment working with us to deliver a modern curriculum. I obviously am excited that our educators will, for when it comes to math at least, in September, be informing our kids about a new grade 9 math curriculum that is exciting. We launched a new math curriculum last year. I mean, we need a partnership with our educators as we continue to modernize our curriculum and make sure it is connected to the labor market and gives young people pathways to jobs and to meaningful employment. So I just say thank you to them for what they've done and what they're going to continue to do in September, because this is going to take a village, if you will, to work together, collaborate, and get kids safely in school, keep them there in class where I know that they will benefit from. Okay.
And on the school learning, a couple from me. So under what circumstance this September do you foresee a child learning from home?
Well, obviously, our priority is to get all children back to class. That's our commitment. The Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Moore, last week confirmed that as a shared priority with our leaders in the public health as well as government. So our intention and our commitment is to get every child in class in September. However, we have permitted and required school boards to offer that choice. So if a parent exercises the choice and opts into online learning, they can do so in September. I would surmise that's going to be a very small number of families that do so this September. What we're hearing, I just spoke to some trustees today in York Region, public and Catholic, and overwhelmingly parents are enrolling their kids in class. They want to get that experience. So we look forward to the majority of kids returning in class. We protected that option should they want it. And the priority for us is just keeping them safe and getting them in school.
And it sounds like extracurriculars you just mentioned. How much of a priority is that? So in September, will those extracurriculars once again be available in schools across Ontario?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, with some adaptation. Our intention is to restore extracurriculars and sport and clubs. There will be adaptations required by public health just to make them safe, make sure that, we could augment them a tad that still allows them to enjoy the activity, but doing so in a safe manner. But that is our commitment. And, I've spoken to the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Moore, the new Chief Medical Officer, many times. And I've raised this, and he has raised this as a shared priorities on sports and on clubs and on extracurriculars, because we know learning doesn't just stop in the classroom. It continues on in this the full learning experience that happens within our school system. So that's something we intend to announce in a few weeks and give more clarity to parents on what those activities can be and how children can enjoy them in school in September.
And the last question comes from Richard Southern at 680 News. He says, what is the one thing you're worried about personally come September about the back to school plan? I mean, we've seen so many ups and downs. Yeah. Students have been in class, out of class. What are you personally worried about? He asks. What keeps you up at night?
Well, look, I mean, I think, our school system has been safe this past year, as confirmed by the former and the current Chief Medical Officer of Health, the head of the science table. We know that. But schools reflect community. And so we need to ensure, and I think a lesson learned, as we've seen this past year, is when cases spike in the community, it could put our schools at risk. They've been very effective at reducing cases within the school, very low transmission, as confirmed by the Chief Medical Officer of New York Region today. Dr. Kurji has confirmed that numerous times, Dr. Lowe and Peel, and a variety of medical officials across public health. But I think the broader worry is how we prevent those types of challenges happening in the future, which is why we're so pleased to see the high voluntary participation of individuals 12 and up and adults getting a vaccine. I think it's not just the concern, but the fact is there's a mitigating component to this. While we're all concerned about cases rising in the community in the future, we're very pleased to see a high rate of vaccine uptake from so many young people in Ontario, 12 up, and of course adults. We're well north of 70% for first doses, almost at 50% for second doses. Just a real sense of momentum happening. And how we prevent that angst that I have and perhaps others have is by encouraging our friends and family to get a vaccine. It is available. They're set aside, particularly for young people. Part of our plan for September is to ensure every child 12 and up and every education worker, all of them, from a school bus driver to an EA, secretary, and educator, and everyone in between, that they have access to 2 doses ahead of September. And I'm grateful for the partnership with the Solicitor General and the Minister of Health, because we're doing that in real time. In fact, we just extended the school-based youth clinics by an additional week to encourage students to get a vaccine. And again, getting a vaccine in itself, I mean, what our message to students is, by getting a vaccine, it's an enabler for a more normal return in September, where you get those extracurriculars and clubs and sports. So we have to see that vaccine rate continue to rise. We really want to see that.
Do you have a number in mind? In terms of double vaccinations, is there a number in mind that would guarantee all of those things come back? Is 70%, 80% of students double vaccinated, 12 plus?
It's a fair question for the Chief Medical Officer of Health, because he'll provide that advice to us. But what I can assure you is that we're seeing numbers increase. We're pleased with that. We want more young people to get a vaccine. We've set aside sufficient supply for the second doses in August. We think by increasing those numbers, we're going to have a more normal September. And that's why we've really worked very hard with our local public health units to get students to get a vaccine for those 12 and up.
Thank you. No further questions.
That was rapid fire. Okay. Thank you.